Thanks for joining us, Professor Lisa Given, and thank you for such an informative workshop today for Central West Farming Systems members at Condobolin on the use of social media and other technologies in agriculture. For those who couldn't attend today, could you give a summary of the most important aspects of becoming involved with and engaging in social media platforms for farmers and farmer groups? To start with, for example, could you just sort of explain why you developed this particular program?
Right, sure. I certainly think that social media is something that is just increasing in interest and being used in a lot of different ways now, particularly for people that run small businesses, people who are interested in kind of promoting a brand, for example. It's not something just used by large companies. It's not something that's only just for fun and used by your kids or grandkids. But I think that means a lot of people need a little bit of education around how can social media be used effectively, what are some of the training aspects, what are some of the technology related aspects, and so part of this is really getting people aware of those issues and then trying to help them to troubleshoot so that they can use social media more effectively.
Right, okay. So what's your personal background and involvement with social media leading up to this point?
Right, so I have a degree in library and information science, and so I do research in looking at how people use technology and how sometimes technology fails us or doesn't allow us to do what we want to do effectively.
Sure.
And I've done that work looking at internet websites, a lot of different technologies, and the last few years I've been doing research around social media just as another technology platform, basically.
Sure, and how has this workshop been received in areas that you visited?
Oh, really well. I mean, I've started doing this both in broad agriculture industries, but also in the wine industry. I think everyone's very curious about social media. There's great diversity of whether people are on social media already and comfortable with it, to people who have very low technical skills or really don't know anything about how the internet works. And so I'm finding that the workshop is really good to talk to people at various stages, and in fact it gives people a way to learn from each other. So I think in addition to what I do, it's also building a community among the people that come to the table for the project, among the different farmers who may not even know each other, or they don't know that their neighbor is on Facebook or Twitter. So it's, I guess, twofold for me of education, giving people a place to play safely with the technology and ask questions, and then get to know what other people in the neighborhood are doing.
So in a way, your workshops on their own and networking are causing people to network and become more involved with each other and what they're doing.
Definitely.
So it's bringing the community closer in that regard as well.
Yeah, and I think it also, for me, a lot of technology isn't the solution, and so sometimes we have to get together in person around a table, even if we're looking at a technology issue.
Yeah, well, that's a question I'll come to in a moment, but obviously you see social media as an important tool for farmers and farming groups and farm businesses. Do you see it as part of a complete package, if you like, of existing promotion and media outlets and existing advertising and promotional, sort of tools? Is social media a standalone, or should it be mixed in with the whole?
Right. I think it should be part of the whole. I mean, I see it as another tool in a person's toolkit around marketing and promotion. It's not something that tomorrow is going to replace if you had an ad in a newspaper or a magazine or other more traditional ways of getting the word out about the product you're selling or what it might be. It's definitely a way sometimes to reach a new or a different audience, because different people read a newspaper versus maybe playing on Twitter.
Yeah.
And so trying to tap into a different audience for marketing is really important.
Sure, and for different businesses and different demographics, sometimes a radio campaign may be more effective than a newspaper. But in this case, one thing I do like about the social media aspect is it can cover a much broader area internationally, for that matter, whereas the more traditional campaigns don't have that far-reaching ability.
Right, they're very, very local, and so at one time social media can be both local and state level and national and international, depending on who follows who and how you're putting yourself out there. So you've got a potential for a much greater reach than you would, say, with local radio, but local radio might be totally what you need for a particular thing.
business. Yeah, that's right. So what social media platforms do you think are most relevant for farmers and farmer groups in this area?
At the moment, I think we're seeing most of the common use around Twitter and Instagram. Those are both platforms that allow people to particularly take photographs, kind of show their work in the moment that they're doing the work. So
yeah, people do like to show that image of what they're doing. Or
to say, you know, this is really what life is like on the farm, or here are some beautiful photos of the animals we're raising.
Yeah, well, a picture tells 1,000 words.
Indeed. And so that's really how people have started using it at the moment. A lot of people are very active as well on things like Facebook, but that might be much more personal rather than business oriented.
Yeah, that's what it seems, that the Facebook, although businesses are using Facebook as a promotional tool, and I think possibly, you know, you can write much more on a Facebook post than you can on, say, Twitter.
Yeah.
But it does seem that Facebook is becoming more of a personal friends and family group, more so than Twitter, which is becoming a more business orientated group, or newsfeed, if you like.
Definitely, and that's certainly where we also see a lot of the newsmakers are following Twitter. So because of the design of the system, you can actually be much more public with the stuff that you're posting, as opposed to Facebook, where people have to friend you and you have to become their friend. Something like Twitter, you're able to actually reach out to journalists or local politicians or other people that wouldn't necessarily be in your smaller circle of contacts. And so the reach that way, even within your local community, can be quite great.
So, Liz, what advice would you give to someone who has no experience whatsoever with Twitter or Instagram or social media, but they're interested in becoming involved for sharing ideas and networking?
Yeah, I'd say the very first thing that you should do is actually try to connect with someone who's already using that type of platform. It may not be the same system. It might be somebody that you know who's really comfortable with technology, always talks about being on Twitter or Facebook or what have you, and take them for coffee and get them to walk you through how have they come to learn about it, what are some of the features. Sometimes hearing from someone who's already using it and playing with the technology and comfortable with it gives you a level of comfort, and you can ask silly questions or figure out what to do next. A lot of people will also look for information on the internet, so once you've got some of the basics, you can then start to look and say, well, what are some more of the advanced features of Twitter, and what else can it do? Certainly I advise people to start by following other people that are in the same industry. If you find a really great Twitter account and you're inspired by it, you know, get ideas. What kind of photos do they take? What kinds of statements did they make? Who do they follow? And you can start to kind of build your own profile from there. Because
that's often the blocking point for a lot of new Twitter users, is they join Twitter and really don't know what to do next, and it's just that first step of following someone or you know, maybe a news station or something that they have an interest in, and then it leads from there very quickly.
And
the initial step.
That's right. I always tell people practice makes perfect. It's partly, you know, people will sometimes join a thing and then it will just, you know, sit on the shelf. They won't use it. And if you really want it to become part of your normal work practice, you have to, you know, build in a time each week or each day that you're going to use the system. It doesn't have to be a huge time commitment, but just consciously saying to yourself, okay, every Friday morning I'm going to do something. I'm going to post a photo, or I'm going to look at something, so that you get in a rhythm of doing it on a regular basis.
Okay. So what about those living in regional Australia that are in a black spot, that don't have very good mobile coverage and internet coverage? Can they still become involved in social media, and how would they go about that?
Definitely. This is a huge problem across all of Australia, certainly, and other parts of the world too. But generally you can still be quite active. A lot of these systems, as long as you have internet somewhere, you'll be able to post things. It may not take a lot of bandwidth to do it, especially on a very small scale. The challenge is that it just means you need to be a bit more conscious of that. So it may mean that when you're picking the kids up from school and you know that the school grounds has really good coverage spot, that's where you're going to tweet when you're waiting for them in the car.
So picking that moment in a
day
or a week.
Exactly. And I also think that people can just start to talk to politicians and companies about the fact that we don't have good internet access. This is something we do have to overcome.
It's an ongoing thing.
It is. So the more vocal that I think farmers and other people in rural Australia can be to say, look, we need better coverage, we need better access, and we want it, and it's important for our businesses, I think that will actually help to push for better coverage.
Yeah, sure. With the social media, although it's a great way to keep in touch with, particularly with the distances in Australia and with overseas travel, it's a great way to keep in touch with friends and family, wherever you happen to be. We know that. And we know it's also a great tool for getting a message out or marketing tool for a business, whatever. But do you think it also sometimes has a detrimental effect on, say, face-to-face contact that we, used to depend on? And also there's just the socialising and networking, face-to-face socialising and networking that we used to do. Do you think it's kind of replacing that in a good way or a negative way?
I don't think it actually is replacing the in-person. I think in many ways it almost increases the in-person because it enhances it.
Yeah.
I think the benefit of it is that you can really broaden your network. You can find out even in your local community, I didn't know that my neighbor down the street had similar interests to what I do, because maybe you see them in the grocery store but you didn't know you had a shared interest. You find that out through social media. You can then connect with that person and talk to them. There's always, I guess, the mythology that we're just going to be slaves to the computer and we'll stop meeting with people and going for coffee. And I don't think that's actually happened. And I think in many ways people are now very conscious of not doing that.
Sure.
They don't want to be slaves to the technology, but it's a conscious thing that you have to say, how will this help me? Where do I draw the line in the sand? And how can I continue to maintain relationships?
Well, touching on that, that's a good comment, because with the networking of the past, you'd often form contacts, but then over time, if you didn't revisit those people or that organisation, you may lose contact over time.
Yes.
Whereas the social media allows you to keep in contact and maintain that contact.
Exactly. And so I find in my own work, sometimes you go to a conference or an event and you get a business card and then it sits in the drawer, whereas if we start following each other on Twitter, that person's name and their presence is more consciously in my everyday
it's alive.
view. Yeah, it's very alive, and you can sit and you might not even see that person for 2 or 3 years, but you can say, he's still doing work in this, and isn't that interesting? And we can now have a distance relationship that's much more fruitful than what it might have been previously.
Okay. What about webinars? Would you classify a webinar as a form of social media?
Yeah, I mean, not in the way that the term gets used. Typically when you see the term social media in the newspaper, they're talking about Facebook, Twitter, these particular applications of it. But the concept of a social medium could be anything. A web page, a webinar, anything where you've got some medium that is creating a social space. So even a website with a forum where people can put comments, right?
Sure.
That is a form of a social medium. But a webinar typically is something that's a bit more, bit less interactive sometimes. So sometimes a webinar, if it's in real time, it has the potential for that social engagement piece that we get with something like Twitter, where you can actually comment in the moment, ask questions of someone as you would on a social media feed. But often a webinar is put up after the fact, or it might be something that was in real time and now it's just archived. And it often loses that social component and just becomes more of an information resource.
And do you think a website alone now is enough for an internet presence? It used to be, the be-all and end-all to have a website. Now do you think that that's enough?
I don't think it's enough. And in fact, I think we're starting to see the tide turn in terms of many people now actually only investing in a social media presence and maybe not having a website. Not that that's maybe the best choice either. So I think you've got to kind of look at the different tools, figure out how you want to use them, and it should be part of a very conscious plan of action.
So what would be your key message to those that are looking to become involved in the social media platforms for either their own just social interaction or networking or business promoting? What are your key messages?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me it's really just give it a try. It doesn't hurt anything generally. These platforms predominantly are completely free to use, and so it will take a bit of time just to get it set up. But giving it a try, seeing what works, what doesn't work, I think people have to really feel comfortable with it. They've got to find their voice. They have to figure out who would I want to reach with this? Why would I want to do that? What's my message?
And it may evolve over time.
Of course, it will evolve over time, and as people become more comfortable with it, what they do with it may well change. But I think if people kind of sit back and say, I don't want to learn about that, they do risk cutting off potential client base, potential colleagues and networks that may really help them. And some of it, I think, is trying to get away from kind of media hype about these things. I think a lot of people think, oh, that's just for, people to post photos of coffee, or for, the kids, they're all on Twitter, but why would I need to do that? And in fact, these technologies have really evolved, and from a business perspective are really quite enriching now.
Yeah, well said. Thank you very much, Professor Gibbons. Much appreciated for your information and insight into a quite important tool, I think, for regional Australia to move forward and promote.
You're welcome. My pleasure.